Perez leaks huge Red Bull information. Ferrari makes final decision on revolutionary engine. And Oscar makes big statement for 2026. Let's get into the latest F1 news. What if I told you that one conversation between two Formula One figures perfectly predicted the complete collapse of motorsport's most successful team? And what if that conversation is now coming back to haunt everyone involved in ways nobody saw coming? This isn't just another story about driver changes or team politics. This is about how one Mexican driver's parting words to his boss turned into the most accurate prophecy in modern Formula One history. And the fallout from ignoring that warning has left careers in ruins and an entire organization scrambling to survive. Let me take you back to the end of 2024, when Red Bull Racing was making what seemed like routine personnel decisions. Sergio Perez had just been dropped as Max Verstappen's teammate after years of solid service to the team. On paper, it looked like standard business practice. Replace the aging veteran with young talent, inject fresh energy into the cockpit, and continue the winning momentum. But here's where our story takes a fascinating turn. During his exit meeting with team principal Christian Horner, Perez didn't just shake hands and walk away quietly. Instead, he posed a question that would prove devastatingly prophetic. He looked his former boss in the eye and asked what would happen when their hastily chosen replacement inevitably failed to deliver. The response from Horner was telling. When Perez questioned what would happen if Liam Lawson couldn't handle the pressure of the Red Bull seat, Horner casually mentioned they had Yuki Tsunoda waiting in the wings. But Perez pressed further, asking what would happen after that option was exhausted too. The uncomfortable reality began to dawn on both men during that conversation. Perez's warning was simple but profound. Red Bull was burning through drivers at an unsustainable pace, and their pipeline of talent wasn't nearly as deep as they believed. The Mexican veteran told Horner directly that the team was going to run out of viable options if they continued their approach of rapid hiring and firing decisions. Horner's acknowledgement of this concern was perhaps the most revealing part of their exchange. When confronted with the mathematical reality of their driver management strategy, the team principal simply admitted he knew they had a problem. Yet despite recognizing the issue, Red Bull proceeded with their plan anyway. The irony of what followed is almost too perfect to believe. Perez, the driver they deemed expendable, has emerged as the biggest winner from this entire mess. While Red Bull scrambled to manage the chaos they created, Perez took time away from the sport to focus on his family and evaluate his future options. He used his unexpected sabbatical to reset mentally and physically, positioning himself perfectly for what came next. Meanwhile, the dominoes began falling exactly as Perez predicted. Liam Lawson, the young New Zealander plucked from the Junior Racing Bulls team, was thrust into one of the most pressure-filled seats in motorsport without adequate preparation. The results were predictable and painful to watch. After just 2 races with the main Red Bull team, Lawson was demoted back to Racing Bulls, proving he wasn't ready for the step-up. But the story doesn't end there. Tsunoda, who Horner had mentioned as their backup plan, fared even worse. The Japanese driver found himself demoted further down the hierarchy, relegated to a reserve role for the current season. Both replacements struggled to achieve even a fraction of the points production that Perez had consistently delivered during his tenure with the team. The human cost of these decisions extends beyond just race results. These are professional athletes at the peak of their careers, and the psychological impact of rapid demotions and role changes cannot be understated. The instability created a toxic environment where confidence eroded and performance suffered across the board. What makes this situation even more remarkable is how completely the power dynamics have shifted. Christian Horner, the man who made the decision to let Perez go, now finds himself on the outside looking in. After 20 years leading Red Bull Racing, Horner was removed from his position as team principal. Reports suggest he's now attempting to find a way back into Formula One through Alpine, essentially starting over at a different team. The contrast couldn't be more stark. Perez, who was supposedly the problem that needed solving, is preparing for his return to Formula One with Cadillac for the 2026 season. He's joining a fresh project with new energy, and renewed motivation, while his former boss searches for opportunities to salvage his own career. This reversal of fortunes highlights something crucial about leadership in high-pressure environments. Sometimes the person asking the difficult questions isn't being negative or disloyal. Sometimes they're the only one in the room with enough experience and perspective to see the bigger picture. Perez's warning wasn't an attack on Red Bull's strategy. It was an attempt to help them avoid a predictable disaster. The broader implications for Formula One are significant. Red Bull's driver carousel has become a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing short-term solutions over long-term stability. Other teams are watching this situation carefully, learning valuable lessons about talent management and succession planning. For young drivers coming through the system, the Red Bull experience has become both an opportunity and a warning. The chance to race for a top team is still appealing, but the risks of being discarded quickly have never been more apparent. The psychological pressure of knowing you might only get a handful of races to prove yourself can be paralyzing for developing talent. The technical side of the story is equally important. Perez brought years of experience and setup knowledge that couldn't be easily replaced. His understanding of car development and race strategy was built over decades of competition. When teams prioritize raw speed over experience and wisdom, they often discover too late what they've lost. Looking forward, Perez's return with Cadillac represents more than just another driver signing. It's a validation of his approach and a testament to the value of patience and professionalism. While others burned bridges and created chaos, Perez maintained his dignity and positioned himself for a strong comeback. The story also raises questions about how Formula One teams evaluate talent and make personnel decisions. The metrics used to judge driver performance often focus on immediate results rather than long-term value. Perez's situation demonstrates how this short-sighted approach can backfire spectacularly. As we head into the 2026 season, the landscape of Formula One will look dramatically different. Perez will return with Cadillac, carrying the satisfaction of being proven right about Red Bull's trajectory. Horner will continue searching for a way back into the sport he helped define for 2 decades. And somewhere in the paddock, young drivers will be reminded that in Formula One, today's hero can quickly become tomorrow's cautionary tale. The most powerful lesson from this entire saga might be the simplest one. When someone with decades of experience in your industry warns you about a fundamental problem with your strategy, it might be worth listening. Perez's prophecy about Red Bull's driver crisis wasn't based on spite or bitterness. It was based on cold, hard analysis of an unsustainable approach. Sometimes the person walking out the door sees things more clearly than those staying behind. What if I told you that one of Formula One's most successful teams just admitted they might never return to their glory days? Mercedes, the team that dominated F1 for nearly a decade, has just delivered a reality check that's sending shockwaves through the paddock. Their trackside engineering director, Andrew Shovlin, just dropped some brutal honesty about the 2026 regulation changes, and what he said will surprise you. We're looking at the biggest shakeup Formula One has seen in years. The 2026 regulations promise to flip everything we know about racing on its head. Lighter cars, smaller dimensions, and power units with 3 times more electrical energy than we see today. It sounds like the perfect opportunity for Mercedes to reclaim their throne, right? Well, according to their own leadership, that couldn't be further from the truth. Let me paint you a picture of where Mercedes stands right now. This is a team that once made winning look effortless. From 2014 to 2020, they were virtually untouchable, claiming 7 consecutive Constructors' Championships. Lewis Hamilton and the Silver Arrows were the gold standard of Formula One. But then 2022 happened, and everything changed. The introduction of ground effect regulations turned their world upside down. Suddenly, the team that had mastered aerodynamics better than anyone else found themselves struggling to understand their own car. While Red Bull soared to new heights and McLaren emerged as a genuine threat, Mercedes was left scratching their heads, wondering where their pace had gone. The numbers don't lie about their recent struggles. Sure, a few second-place finishes, a third and a fourth might look respectable in the record books decades from now. But for a team accustomed to fighting for victories every weekend, these results represent their worst period in the modern Formula One era. They went from championship contenders to also-rans almost overnight. So when massive regulation changes loom on the horizon, you'd expect Mercedes to be rubbing their hands together with excitement. After all, new rules mean a clean slate, right? Every team gets to start fresh. And historically, regulation changes have been kind to teams with deep pockets and engineering expertise. Mercedes has both in abundance. But here's where Chauvelin's comments become absolutely fascinating. He's essentially telling everyone not to expect miracles just because the rules are changing. In his own words, there isn't a single shred of expectation within the Mercedes team that these new regulations will somehow magically suit them better than their competitors. Think about how remarkable this admission is. We're talking about a team with one of the largest budgets in the sport, some of the brightest minds in motorsport, and facilities that rival aerospace companies. Yet their own leadership is tempering expectations in a way that would have been unthinkable during their dominant years. Chauvelin's perspective comes from deep experience within the organization. He's been there since the team's inception as Mercedes, and even before that during their days as Braun GP and Honda. He's witnessed firsthand how regulation changes can either elevate a team to greatness or send them tumbling down the order. His caution isn't pessimism, it's realism born from understanding how complex modern Formula One has become. The 2026 regulations represent more than just technical changes. They're fundamentally altering what it means to build a competitive Formula One car. The increased electrical power component alone will require teams to master energy deployment in ways they never have before. Add in the aerodynamic changes, weight reductions, and dimensional alterations, and you're looking at essentially designing a completely different type of racing machine. What makes this even more intriguing is that these new cars will supposedly bear some resemblance to the machines Mercedes dominated with in 2020 and 2021. You might think this would give them an advantage, some institutional knowledge they could leverage. But Chauvelin is explicitly rejecting this notion, insisting they're approaching 2026 as a completely fresh challenge, rather than a return to familiar territory. This mindset reveals something profound about modern Formula One competition. The sport has evolved to a point where past success guarantees absolutely nothing about future performance. The technical complexity is so immense that even teams with proven track records can find themselves completely lost when regulations shift. Consider what happened to other historically successful teams during regulation changes. Ferrari has struggled to maintain consistency despite their resources and heritage. McLaren spent years in the wilderness before their recent resurgence. Even Red Bull, currently dominant, had their own periods of uncertainty when rules changed. Mercedes is simply being honest about a reality that every team faces, but few openly acknowledge. The competitive landscape heading into 2026 is unlike anything we've seen before. Not only do you have the traditional powerhouses like Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull, but you also have teams like McLaren that have proven they can adapt quickly to new regulations. Then there are the wildcards like Aston Martin with their massive investment and Alpine with their Works engine program. The grid is more competitive now than it has been in decades. What Chauvelin is really saying is that Mercedes refuses to coast on their reputation. They understand that the teams who succeed in 2026 will be those who approach the new challenge with humility, dedication, and a willingness to completely reimagine their approach to car development. It's not enough to be good at multiple things. You have to be exceptional across every single area of performance. The breadth of challenges facing teams in 2026 is staggering. Aerodynamics, power unit integration, energy management, suspension design, weight distribution, cooling systems, reliability, and race strategy will all play crucial roles. A weakness in any single area could render advantages in others meaningless. This is why Chauvelin emphasizes that success will come to whichever team masters the greatest number of these interconnected challenges. Mercedes' honest assessment of their situation is actually quite refreshing in a sport where teams often engage in psychological warfare through the media. Instead of talking up their chances or making bold predictions, they're setting realistic expectations while committing to the hard work necessary for success. This approach might not generate headlines, but it demonstrates a mature understanding of what lies ahead. The implications extend beyond just Mercedes. If a team with their resources and experience is being this cautious about 2026, what does that say about the uncertainty facing the entire grid? We could be looking at one of the most unpredictable seasons in Formula One history. The established order might be completely reshuffled, creating opportunities for unexpected success stories and dramatic falls from grace. Looking ahead to 2026, the only certainty is uncertainty. Mercedes has chosen to embrace this reality rather than fight against it. They're acknowledging that their previous dominance doesn't guarantee future success, that the sport has evolved beyond the point where any team can assume they understand what it takes to win. This honest self-assessment might actually be Mercedes' greatest strength going into the new regulation cycle. While other teams might be overconfident or making assumptions based on past performance, Mercedes is approaching 2026 with the mindset of a challenger rather than a former champion expecting to return to the top. Sometimes that hungry, humble approach is exactly what it takes to achieve greatness. The 2026 Formula One season promises to be a fascinating reset for the entire sport, and Mercedes has just given us a glimpse into the mindset required to succeed in this new era. They're not expecting miracles, but they're prepared to work for them. Picture this. Red Bull Racing, the team that dominated Formula One for years, is about to face its biggest test ever. But here's the thing. All the masterminds behind their success are gone. Christian Horner, Adrian Newey, Helmut Marko, the trio that built an empire, have all walked away. And now, as we head into 2026, Red Bull is starting completely from scratch with a brand new set of rules and faces nobody's heard of running the show. What happens when a championship-winning machine loses all its architects? Today, we're diving deep into why 2026 could either make or break Red Bull Racing forever. Let's rewind to understand just how massive this transformation really is. Red Bull wasn't always the powerhouse we know today. Back in 2004, energy drink mogul Dietrich Mateschitz took a massive gamble, purchasing the struggling Jaguar team at Milton Keynes. This wasn't just about buying a racing team. Mateschitz had a vision to completely disrupt Formula One. The first genius move was bringing in Christian Horner as team principal in 2005. Here was a young, unproven team owner from Arden International with zero experience running an F1 operation. Most people thought Mateschitz had lost his mind, but what Horner lacked in experience, he made up for in ambition and political savvy. Horner immediately understood that success in Formula One isn't just about fast cars, it's about attracting the right talent. His first major coup was convincing David Coulthard to join as their star driver. Coulthard wasn't just fast behind the wheel, he had connections throughout the paddock that would prove invaluable. The masterstroke came when Horner and Coulthard managed to lure Adrian Newey away from McLaren. This was absolutely shocking. Newey was the most coveted aerodynamicist in the sport, the man behind multiple championship-winning cars. McLaren was furious, but Red Bull had pulled off the impossible within just 12 months of entering Formula One. What made this possible was Mateschitz's unique approach to leadership. Unlike other team owners who had to answer to boards and shareholders, Mateschitz essentially had complete control over Red Bull. This meant quick decisions and massive investments when opportunities arose. When Newey wanted an eye-watering salary, Mateschitz didn't hesitate. But Newey didn't come alone. He convinced other McLaren personnel like Peter Prodromou to join Red Bull's aerodynamics department. Meanwhile, Horner was building a technical dream team, securing Rob Marshall from Renault as chief designer and Jonathan Wheatley as team manager. The cultural transformation was just as important as the technical one. Red Bull brought a completely different energy to Formula One. While McLaren operated with corporate sterility and Ferrari maintained its traditional Italian formality, Red Bull was loud, colorful, and unapologetically different. The famous Red Bull Energy Station appeared in the paddock, an open house where anyone could drop by. Music blared from their garage, They weren't just racing, they were putting on a show. This wasn't accidental. Mateschitz wanted to disrupt the established order, and Horner fully embraced this philosophy. They were building something that had never existed in Formula One before, a team that was simultaneously highly professional and refreshingly rebellious. The results spoke for themselves. Within 5 years of Mateschitz's initial investment, Red Bull had transformed from midfield strugglers to race winners. By 2010, they were world champions with Sebastian Vettel, beginning an incredible run of 4 consecutive titles. For over a decade, this core group remained intact. Horner as the political mastermind and team leader, Newey as the technical genius, Marco as the strategic advisor, Marshall overseeing car design, and Wheatley managing race operations. This stability was Red Bull's secret weapon. While other teams constantly reshuffled their leadership, Red Bull's consistency allowed them to build something truly special. Even during the Mercedes-dominated hybrid era starting in 2014, when Red Bull struggled with underpowered Renault engines, the core team stayed together. They knew their chassis and aerodynamics remained world-class. They just needed better power units. This patience and loyalty would eventually pay off when they switched to Honda engines in 2019, setting up their return to championship glory with Max Verstappen. But then everything changed in October 2022 when Dietrich Mateschitz passed away. The man who had given Red Bull its identity and protected its unique culture was gone. Control of the company passed to a new management structure, with Oliver Mintzlaff becoming CEO for projects and investments, essentially taking control of the Formula One team. What happened next was like watching a championship-winning dynasty collapse in slow motion. Rob Marshall was the first to leave, joining McLaren in mid-2023. Then came the bombshell internal investigation into Christian Horner's conduct in early 2024. Although Horner was cleared twice, the damage to relationships within the team was irreversible. Adrian Newey, who had been cooling on Horner for months, finally decided he'd had enough. After almost 2 decades with Red Bull, the aerodynamics genius announced his departure to join Aston Martin, where he would become team principal for the first time in his career. Jonathan Wheatley, seeing limited opportunities for advancement with Horner firmly in control, accepted the team principal position at Sauber Audi. Will Courtney, Red Bull's strategy mastermind, also jumped ship to McLaren. The political warfare behind the scenes was intense. Helmut Marko, whose loyalty had always been to Mateschitz rather than Horner, was reportedly doing everything possible to prevent Horner from gaining complete control of the team. This created a toxic environment that even Max Verstappen's father Jos publicly criticized, calling for Horner's removal. In 2025, Mintzlaff finally acted. After poor performances at Red Bull's home races in Austria and Great Britain, with Verstappen openly stating he wasn't in championship contention, the new Red Bull hierarchy pulled the trigger. Horner was removed as team principal, along with other senior staff members aligned with him. Laurent Mekies, who had been managing Red Bull's sister team Racing Bulls, was promoted to become the new team boss and CEO. The message was clear. This was no longer Christian Horner's Red Bull Racing. This was a new corporate entity with new leadership and new priorities. But Marco's victory was short-lived. Within 5 months, the 82-year-old advisor was also pushed out after making unilateral decisions without consulting the new management structure. By the end of 2025, every single architect of Red Bull's success over the past 2 decades was gone. This brings us to 2026, and why this year changes absolutely everything. The new regulation changes mean every team is essentially starting from scratch with completely different cars. But while other teams are building on existing foundations, Red Bull is doing this with an entirely new leadership structure that has never worked together at this level before. Laurent Mekies is undoubtedly talented. His analytical mind and engineering background have already shown promise during Red Bull's improved performance in the second half of 2025. But there's a crucial difference between inheriting a championship-winning team and building one from the ground up. Mekies has never been the top decision-maker at a front-running team during a major regulation change. The technical leadership has also shifted dramatically. Pierre Wache, who learned alongside Newey for many years, is now the sole technical director. While Wache designed the dominant RB19 that won 21 out of 22 races in 2023, that car was still developed under Newey's watchful eye. The 2026 car will be the first completely overseen by Wache's leadership alone. This isn't to suggest the technical team lacks talent. Craig Skinner, Enrico Balbo, and Paul Monaghan are all exceptional engineers who remain with the team. But losing someone of Newey's caliber, a man with an almost supernatural ability to visualize aerodynamic flow, is impossible to replace. The corporate culture has also fundamentally changed. Under Mateschitz and Horner, Red Bull was known for fighting every political battle, challenging every decision, and leaving no stone unturned in pursuit of competitive advantage. Remember Red Bull's post-race complaint about George Russell in Canada? It was the kind of move that irritated everyone but showed Red Bull would exploit any opportunity, no matter how small. Mickey's represents a different philosophy. He speaks about racing with respect for rivals and creating a cleaner, more corporate entity. The schoolyard scrap mentality that characterized Red Bull's approach for 20 years appears to be disappearing. Whether this new approach will be as effective remains to be seen. The pressure on the new leadership is immense. Red Bull's success over the past decade has created expectations that they'll always be championship contenders. But as Ferrari knows all too well, these expectations can become crushing when results don't match ambitions. Oliver Mintzlaff, whose background includes managing Red Bull's football operations, has made it clear that he, not Mekies, is the ultimate authority over the F1 team. This represents a much more hands-on approach than Mateschitz ever took. But football and Formula One operate on completely different timescales and require different management philosophies. The question becomes whether Mintzlaff truly understands what made Red Bull successful in the first place. Was it just the technical talent and financial resources? Or was it the unique culture, the willingness to take risks, and the political savvy that Horner brought to every situation? There are already signs that Red Bull's approach has become more conservative. At the 2025 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, when an opportunity arose to pit Verstappen late in the race for fresher tires, a move that could have disrupted the McLarens fighting for the championship, Red Bull chose not to take the gamble. The old Red Bull, led by Horner, would likely have seized any chance to create chaos and potentially change the championship outcome. But perhaps the biggest challenge facing Red Bull is convincing Max Verstappen that their best days aren't behind them. Verstappen has already expressed concerns about the team's direction during the 2025 season. With Mercedes and other teams circling, Red Bull must prove they can maintain their competitive edge with an entirely new leadership structure. The irony is striking. Red Bull spent 20 years building an incredibly successful operation only to tear it all down, just as new regulations were about to level the playing field. Other teams like Mercedes, McLaren, and Ferrari are approaching 2026 with stable leadership structures and continuity in their technical departments. Red Bull is essentially starting over. This doesn't mean failure is inevitable. History shows that new leadership can sometimes revitalize organizations that have become too comfortable or set in their ways. Mekies might bring fresh perspectives and approaches that prove even more effective than the previous regime. The technical foundation remains strong. Many of the engineers and designers who created Red Bull's championship-winning cars are still with the team. The Milton Keynes factory is still world-class, the budget is substantial, and they're developing their own power unit for the first time, which could provide a competitive advantage. But the margin for error in Formula One is incredibly small. Championship fights are often decided by the smallest details: tire, strategy calls, development direction choices, political maneuvering during rule clarifications. These are areas where experience and relationships built over decades can make the difference between success and failure. The 2026 season will be the ultimate test of whether Red Bull's new approach can match the success of the old regime. Can Laurent Mekies develop the same political acumen that made Christian Horner so effective? Can Pierre Wache fill the enormous shoes left by Adrian Newey's departure? Can the new corporate structure make decisions quickly enough to stay competitive in Formula One's fast-moving environment? Most importantly, can this new Red Bull maintain the hunger and determination that drove their success for 2 decades? When you've been at the top for so long, complacency becomes a real danger. The old guard fought tooth and nail for every advantage because they remembered what it was like to struggle in the midfield. The new leadership has inherited success, without necessarily understanding the sacrifices required to maintain it. The stakes couldn't be higher. Formula One history is littered with teams that dominated for years before falling back into mediocrity. Williams won Constructors' Championships in the 1980s and 1990s, but hasn't won a race since 2012. McLaren was the sport's most successful team for decades, but has struggled to recapture their former glory. Ferrari, despite their resources and history, last won a championship in 2008. Red Bull is at a crossroads. They can either successfully transition to new leadership and maintain their position at the front of the grid, or they can join the list of former champions struggling to recapture past glories. The 2026 season will likely determine which path they take. What makes this situation even more fascinating is that it's happening just as Formula One enters a new era with completely revised technical regulations. These rule changes were designed to create closer competition and give every team a fresh start. Red Bull could emerge from this transition stronger than ever, or they could find themselves fighting for midfield positions while other teams seize the opportunity. The next few years will reveal whether Red Bull's success was built on the genius of a few key individuals, or on something deeper within the organization's culture and structure. It's one of the most compelling stories in modern Formula One, and 2026 is when we'll finally start getting answers. Red Bull's hard reset represents both enormous risk and tremendous opportunity. They've gambled everything on the belief that their new approach will be more successful than the one that brought them multiple championships. Time will tell whether they've made the right choice, but one thing is certain. Formula One will be watching very closely to see if the new Red Bull can match the achievements of the old one. What's happening, Formula One fans? Today we're diving into one of the most dramatic contract sagas in recent Formula One history. And trust me, this story has everything you could want from a motorsport thriller. Betrayal, secret negotiations, a legendary Twitter clapback, and a young driver who had the courage to bet his entire career on one massive decision. This is the Oscar Piastri Alpine drama that had the entire paddock talking, and we're breaking down every single detail. Picture this scenario for a second. You're a rising star in Formula One. You've dominated every junior series you've ever entered, and suddenly you find yourself caught between 2 major teams fighting over your signature. One team announces you as their driver without your permission, and the other offers you what might be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. What do you do when your entire future hangs in the balance? That's exactly the position Oscar Piastri found himself in during the summer of 2022, and the way he handled it would change not just his career, but how contract negotiations work in Formula One forever. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this saga became the stuff of legend, and how Piastri's bold move paid off in ways nobody could have predicted. Let's set the stage here. Oscar Piastri wasn't just any ordinary prospect coming through the ranks. This kid was something special, and everyone in the paddock knew it. He'd achieved something almost unheard of in modern motorsport, winning the Formula Renault Eurocup, Formula 3, and Formula 2 championships in consecutive seasons. That kind of dominance doesn't happen by accident. When you're steamrolling through the junior categories like that, Formula One teams start paying serious attention. But here's where things get complicated. Despite this incredible junior record, Piastri couldn't secure a Formula One seat for 2022. The grid was full, and he found himself in the frustrating position of being one of the most talented drivers not racing in Formula One. Alpine stepped in and offered him a reserve driver role, which seemed like the logical next step. He'd stay connected to Formula One, learn from the team, and wait for his opportunity. Alpine had been nurturing Piastri through their academy program, and there was an understanding that when a seat became available, he'd be their guy. From Alpine's perspective, they'd invested heavily in his development, and they expected that loyalty to be rewarded when the time came. This is where the story takes its first dramatic turn. Fernando Alonso had been Alpine's star driver, but during the summer of 2022, he shocked everyone by announcing his move to Aston Martin. Suddenly, Alpine had a prime seat opening up, and they moved quickly to fill it. Without consulting Piastri or his management team, Alpine issued a press release announcing that Oscar Piastri would be replacing Alonso for the 2023 season. Now, imagine being in Piastri's shoes at this moment. You're watching social media explode with news about your supposed new drive, but nobody actually asked if you wanted the seat. Your phone is blowing up with congratulations from friends and family, but you know something the rest of the world doesn't. You've already committed to someone else. What happened next became instant Formula One folklore. Piastri took to Twitter and posted what might be the most legendary driver statement in motorsport history. He wrote, and I'm paraphrasing here, that Alpine had announced his drive without his agreement, that he hadn't signed any contract with them, and that he would not be racing for Alpine in 2023. Can you imagine the chaos that followed? The Formula One world went absolutely mental. Drivers just don't publicly reject teams like this, especially not promising young drivers turning down established manufacturers. The tweet broke the internet before anyone even understood what was really happening behind the scenes. Alpine was left looking completely foolish, having announced a driver who immediately and publicly rejected them. But here's what makes this story even more incredible. While Alpine thought they had Piastri locked up, McLaren had been quietly working in the background. They recognized that Alpine's contract situation might not be as solid as it appeared, and they made their move. McLaren offered Piastri something that Alpine couldn't match at the time: a clear path to success with a team that was genuinely competitive. The timing was perfect for McLaren and devastating for Alpine. McLaren had been struggling with Daniel Ricciardo's performance, and they needed a change. They saw an opportunity to snatch one of the most promising young drivers in the sport, and they took it. For Piastri, McLaren represented everything he wanted: a team with championship potential, cutting-edge technology, and a culture that develops young talent. Alpine wasn't going down without a fight. They insisted. Their contract with Piastri was valid and legally binding. This led to one of the most fascinating legal battles in Formula One history. The case went before the Contract Recognition Board, which is essentially Formula One's Supreme Court for contract disputes. Both teams presented their arguments, with Alpine claiming they had a valid agreement, and McLaren arguing that Piastri was free to sign wherever he chose. The tension during this period was absolutely incredible. Piastri's entire career hung in the balance. If the board ruled in Alpine's favor, he'd be forced to drive for a team he'd already publicly rejected. If McLaren won, he'd get his dream seat, but would face the challenge of proving he belonged there under intense scrutiny. Think about the pressure Piastri was under during these months. Every Formula One fan was watching his situation, debating whether he'd made the right choice or committed career suicide. Some people thought he was being ungrateful to Alpine, who had supported his development. Others admired his courage for betting on himself and choosing the team he believed would give him the best chance of success. The Contract Recognition Board ultimately ruled in McLaren's favor, validating Piastri's decision and clearing the way for him to join the team. But winning the legal battle was just the beginning of his challenges. Now he had to prove on track that all the drama had been worth it. Looking back at this saga now, with the benefit of hindsight, we can see how brilliant Piastri's decision really was. McLaren has developed into one of the most competitive teams on the grid, regularly fighting for wins and championships. Meanwhile, Alpine has struggled to find consistency and hasn't achieved the same level of success. Piastri's journey with McLaren has been nothing short of spectacular. He's won multiple races, led significant portions of championship campaigns, and established himself as one of Formula One's brightest stars. The kid who took that massive risk by rejecting Alpine has proven that sometimes you have to bet everything on yourself to achieve greatness. What makes this story even more interesting is how Piastri reflects on it today. In recent interviews, he's admitted that while the situation was incredibly stressful at the time, he can now look back and laugh about the whole drama. He's said that there were specific reasons for his decision that weren't public knowledge at the time, and that he knew the Twitter announcement would create a massive story. The Alpine saga has become a masterclass in how contract negotiations work in modern Formula One. Teams can no longer assume that supporting a young driver guarantees their loyalty. Drivers and their management teams have become much more sophisticated about protecting their interests and securing the best possible opportunities. For Alpine, this whole situation was a wake-up call about how they handle driver relationships and contract negotiations. They learned the hard way that investing in a driver's development doesn't automatically guarantee their services, especially if you don't have bulletproof legal agreements in place. The broader impact of this story extends far beyond just Piastri's career. It changed how teams approach contract negotiations with young drivers and highlighted the importance of clear communication between all parties involved. It also showed that in the social media age, drivers have more power than ever to control their own narratives. What's really remarkable about Piastri's decision is how mature and calculated it was for such a young driver. He could have taken the safe option with Alpine, grateful for any Formula One opportunity. Instead, he recognized that this might be his only chance to join a team with real championship potential. And he took that risk despite the enormous pressure and criticism he faced. Today, as we watch Piastri competing at the highest level of motorsport, it's clear that his gamble paid off spectacularly. He's become one of the most respected drivers on the grid, and his relationship with McLaren continues to strengthen. The team recently extended his contract through 2028, showing their confidence in his abilities and their commitment to building around him for the future. The Alpine saga will forever be remembered as one of Formula One's most dramatic contract disputes, but it's also a story about having the courage to chase your dreams even when everyone thinks you're making a mistake. Piastri bet on himself when the stakes couldn't have been higher, and that decision has defined his entire career. Sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards, and Oscar Piastri's journey from promising junior driver to Formula One star is proof that fortune really does favor the bold.